Dark bright fire-lit eyes. I seek no favor untouched by blood. Our visions begin with our desires. Revolution is not a one-time event. I am deliberate and afraid of nothing. Oppression is as American as apple pie. A choice of pains. That's what living was all about. Our feelings are our most genuine paths to knowledge. Each time you love, love as deeply as if it were forever. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. We are all more blind to what we have than to what we have not. Life is very short, and what we have to do must be done in the now. Nothing I accept about myself can be used against me to diminish me. There are no new ideas. There are only new ways of making them felt. Hatred is a death wish for the hated, not a life wish for anything else. The learning process is something you can incite, literally incite, like a riot. There is no thing as a single-issue struggle because we do not live single-issue lives. Only by learning to live in harmony with your contradictions can you keep it all afloat. I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. But the true feminist deals out of a lesbian consciousness whether or not she ever sleeps with women. When I use my strength in the service of my vision, it makes no difference whether or not I am afraid. While we wait in silence for that final luxury of fearlessness, the weight of that silence will choke us. Black women sharing close ties with each other, politically or emotionally, are not the enemies of black men. I can't really define it in sexual terms alone, although our sexuality is so energizing, why not enjoy it too? If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. And that visibility which makes us most vulnerable is that which also is the source of our greatest strength. It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. Oppressed peoples are always being asked to stretch a little more, to bridge the gap between blindness and humanity. No woman is responsible for altering the psyche of her oppressor, even when that psyche is embodied in another woman. We can learn to work and speak when we are afraid in the same way we have learned to work and speak when we are tired. Unless one lives and loves in the trenches, it is difficult to remember that the war against dehumanization is ceaseless. What gets me about the United States is that it pretends to be honest and therefore has so little room to move toward hope. Institutionalized rejection of difference is an absolute necessity in a profit economy which needs outsiders as surplus people. When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. In our work and in our living, we must recognize that difference is a reason for celebration and growth, rather than a reason for destruction. I realize that if I wait until I am no longer afraid to act right speak be I'll be sending messages on a Ouija board, cryptic complaints from the other side. It's a struggle, but that's why we exist, so that another generation of lesbians of color will not have to invent themselves, or their history, all over again. When we create out of our experiences, as feminists of color, women of color, we have to develop those structures that will present and circulate our culture. As a black lesbian mother in an interracial marriage, there was usually some part of me guaranteed to offend everybody's comfortable prejudices of who I should be. Without community, there is no liberation, but community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. I find I am constantly being encouraged to pluck out some one aspect of myself and present this as the meaningful whole, eclipsing or denying the other parts of self. I remember how being young and black and gay and lonely felt. A lot of it was fine, feeling I had the truth and the light and the key, but a lot of it was purely hell. I would like to do another piece of fiction dealing with a number of issues: lesbian parenting, the 1960s, and interracial relationships in the lesbian and gay community. Love is a word, another kind of open. As the diamond comes into a knot of flame, I am black because I come from the earth's inside. Take my word for jewel in the open light. I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. Too often, we pour the energy needed for recognizing and exploring difference into pretending those differences are insurmountable barriers, or that they do not exist at all. The quality of light by which we scrutinize our lives has direct bearing upon the product which we live, and upon the changes which we hope to bring about through those lives. We have to consciously study how to be tender with each other until it becomes a habit, because what was native has been stolen from us, the love of black women for each other. We tend to think of the erotic as an easy, tantalizing sexual arousal. I speak of the erotic as the deepest life force, a force which moves us toward living in a fundamental way. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed, but when we are silent we are still afraid, so it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. Poetry is not only dream and vision, it is the skeleton architecture of our lives. It lays the foundations for a future of change, a bridge across our fears of what has never been before. If this society ascribes roles to black men which they are not allowed to fulfill, is it black women who must bend and alter our lives to compensate, or is it society that needs changing? Raising black children, female and male, in the mouth of a racist, sexist, suicidal dragon is perilous and chancy. If they cannot love and resist at the same time, they will probably not survive. The failure of academic feminists to recognize difference as a crucial strength is a failure to reach beyond the first patriarchal lesson. In our world, divide and conquer must become define and empower. For we have been socialized to respect fear more than our own needs for language and definition, and while we wait in silence for that final luxury of fearlessness, the weight of that silence will choke us. We can sit in our corners mute forever while our sisters and ourselves are distorted and destroyed, while our earth is poisoned. We can sit in our safe corners mute as bottles, and we will still be no less afraid. There's always someone asking you to underline one piece of yourself, whether it's black, woman, mother, dyke, teacher, etc., because that's the piece that they need to key into. They want to dismiss everything else. I cried to think of how lucky we both were to have found each other, since it was clear that we were the only ones in the world who could understand what we understood in the instantaneous manner in which we understood it. If what we need to dream, to move our spirits most deeply and directly toward and through promise, is discounted as a luxury, then we give up the core, the fountain of our power, our womanness. We give up the future of our worlds. The true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations which we seek to escape, but that piece of the oppressor which is planted deep within each of us, and which knows only the oppressor's tactics, the oppressor's relationships. I became more courageous by doing the very things I needed to be courageous for, first a little and badly. Then bit by bit more and better. Being avidly, sometimes annoyingly curious and persistent about discovering how others were doing what I wanted to do. I have a duty to speak the truth as I see it and share not just my triumphs, not just the things that felt good, but the pain, the intense, often unmitigated pain. It is important to share how I know survival is survival and not just a walk through the rain. Every woman I have ever loved has left her print upon me, where I loved some invaluable piece of myself apart from me, so different that I had to stretch and grow in order to recognize her. And in that growing, we came to separation, that place where work begins. Men who are afraid to feel must keep women around to do their feeling for them while dismissing us for the same supposedly inferior capacity to feel deeply. But in this way also, men deny themselves their own essential humanity, becoming trapped in dependency and fear. Some problems we share as women, some we do not. You hear your children will grow up to join the patriarchy and testify against you. We fear our children will be dragged from a car and shot down in the street, and you will turn your backs upon the reasons they are dying. What woman here is so enamored of her own oppression that she cannot see her heel print upon another woman's face? What woman's terms of oppression have become precious and necessary to her as a ticket into the fold of the righteous, away from the cold winds of self-scrutiny? I do not wish my anger and pain and fear about cancer to fossilize into yet another silence, nor to rob me of whatever strength can lie at the core of this experience, openly acknowledged and examined. Imposed silence about any area of our lives is a tool for separation and powerlessness. Delois lived up the block on 142nd Street and never had her hair done, and all the neighborhood women sucked their teeth as she walked by. Her crispy hair twinkled in the summer sun as her big proud stomach moved her on down the block while I watched, not caring whether or not she was a poem. But anger expressed and translated into action in the service of our vision and our future is a liberating and strengthening act of clarification, for it is in the painful process of this translation that we identify who are our allies with whom we have grave differences, and who are our genuine enemies. When there is no connection at all between people, then anger is a way of bringing them closer together, of making contact. But when there is a great deal of connectedness that is problematic or threatening or unacknowledged, then anger is a way of keeping people separate, of putting distance between us. My silences had not protected me. Your silence will not protect you. But for every real word spoken, for every attempt I had ever made to speak those truths for which I am still seeking, I had made contact with other women while we examined the words to fit a world in which we all believed, bridging our differences. Certainly there are very real differences between us of race, age, and sex. But it is not those differences between us that are separating us. It is rather our refusal to recognize those differences, and to examine the distortions which result from our misnaming them and their effects upon human behavior and expectation. When we admit and deal with difference, when we deal with the deep bitterness, when we deal with the horror of even our different nightmares, when we turn them and look at them, it's like looking at death, hard but possible. If you look at it directly without embracing it, then there is much less that you can ever be made to fear. I cannot hide my anger to spare you guilt, nor hurt feelings, nor answering anger, for to do so insults and trivializes all our efforts. Guilt is not a response to anger. It is a response to one's own actions or lack of action. If it leads to change, then it can be useful, since it is then no longer guilt but the beginning of knowledge. Tell them about how you're never really a whole person if you remain silent, because there's always that one little piece inside you that wants to be spoken out, and if you keep ignoring it, it gets madder and madder and hotter, and if you don't speak it out one day it will just up and punch you in the mouth from the inside. Each one of us had been starved for love for so long that we wanted to believe that love, once found, was all-powerful. We wanted to believe that it could give word to my inchoate pain and rages, that it could enable Muriel to face the world and get a job, that it could free our writings, cure racism, end homophobia and adolescent acne. I want to live the rest of my life, however long or short, with as much sweetness as I can decently manage, loving all the people I love, and doing as much as I can of the work I still have to do. I am going to write fire until it comes out of my ears, my eyes, my nose holes everywhere. Until it's every breath I breathe. I'm going to go out like a fucking meteor. Each of us is called upon to take a stand. So in these days ahead, as we examine ourselves and each other, our works, our fears, our differences, our sisterhood and survivals, I urge you to tackle what is most difficult for us all, self-scrutiny of our complacencies, the idea that since each of us believes she is on the side of right, she need not examine her position. However, experience has taught us that action in the now is also necessary, always. Our children cannot dream unless they live, they cannot live unless they are nourished, and who else will feed them the real food without which their dreams will be no different from ours? If you want us to change the world someday, we at least have to live long enough to grow up, shouts the child. Those of us who stand outside the circle of this society's definition of acceptable women, those of us who have been forged in the crucibles of difference, those of us who are poor, who are lesbians, who are black, who are older, know that survival is not an academic skill, for the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. They will never allow us to bring about genuine change. You loved people and you came to depend on their being there. But people died or changed or went away and it hurt too much. The only way to avoid that point was not to love anyone, and not to let anyone get too close or too important. The secret of not being hurt like this again, I decided, was never depending on anyone, never needing, never loving. It is the last dream of children, to be forever untouched. It is as hard for our children to believe that we are not omnipotent as it is for us to know it, as parents. But that knowledge is necessary as the first step in the reassessment of power as something other than might, age, privilege, or the lack of fear. It is an important step for a boy, whose societal destruction begins when he is forced to believe that he can only be strong if he doesn't feel, or if he wins. The angers between women will not kill us if we can articulate them with precision, if we listen to the content of what is said with at least as much intensity as we defend ourselves against the manner of saying. When we turn from anger we turn from insight, saying we will accept only the designs already known, deadly and safely familiar. I have tried to learn my anger's usefulness to me, as well as its limitations. Guilt is not a response to anger, it is a response to one's own actions or lack of action. If it leads to change then it can be useful, since it is then no longer guilt but the beginning of knowledge. Yet all too often, guilt is just another name for impotence, for defensiveness destructive of communication. It becomes a device to protect ignorance and the continuation of things the way they are, the ultimate protection for changelessness. Black and third world people are expected to educate white people as to our humanity. Women are expected to educate men. Lesbians and gay men are expected to educate the heterosexual world. The oppressors maintain their position and evade their responsibility for their own actions. There is a constant drain of energy which might be better used in redefining ourselves and devising realistic scenarios for altering the present and constructing the future. The quality of light by which we scrutinize our lives has direct bearing upon the product which we live, and upon the changes which we hope to bring about through those lives. It is within this light that we form those ideas by which we pursue our magic and make it realized. This is poetry as illumination, for it is through poetry that we give name to those ideas which are, until the poem, nameless and formless, about to be birthed, but already felt. Black men are not so passive that they must have black women speak for them. Even my 14-year-old son knows that. Black men themselves must examine and articulate their own desires and positions and stand by the conclusions thereof. No point is served by a black male professional who merely whines at the absence of his viewpoint in black women's work. Oppressors always expect the oppressed to extend to them the understanding so lacking in themselves. If you come as softly as wind within the trees, you may hear what I hear, see what sorrow sees. If you come as lightly as threading dew, I will take you gladly and nor ask more of you. You may sit beside me silent as a breath, only those who stay dead shall remember death. And if you come, I will be silent nor speak harsh words to you. I will not ask you why, now, or how, or what you do. We shall sit here, softly beneath two different years, and the rich earth between us shall drink our tears. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. Racism and homophobia are real conditions of all our lives in this place and time. I urge each one of us here to reach down into that deep place of knowledge inside herself and touch that terror and loathing of any difference that lives here. See whose face it wears. Then the personal as the political can begin to illuminate all our choices. Women of today are still being called upon to stretch across the gap of male ignorance and to educate men as to our existence and our needs. This is an old and primary tool of all oppressors to keep the oppressed occupied with the master's concerns. Now we hear that it is the task of women of color to educated white women, in the face of tremendous resistance, as to our existence, our differences, our relative roles in our joint survival. This is a diversion of energies and a tragic repetition of racist patriarchal thought. The breakdown of mummies and daddies was an important part of lesbian relationships in the bagatelle. For some of us, however, role-playing reflected all the depreciating attitudes toward women which we loathed in straight society. It was the rejection of these roles that had drawn us to the life in the first place. Instinctively, without particular theory or political position or dialectic, we recognized oppression as oppression, no matter where it came from. But those lesbians who had carved some niche in the pretend world of dominance/subordination rejected what they called our confused lifestyle, and they were in the majority. Of all the art forms, poetry is the most economical. It is the one which is the most secret, which requires the least physical labor, the least material, and the one which can be done between shifts, in the hospital pantry, on the subway, and on scraps of surplus paper. Over the last few years, writing a novel on tight finances, I came to appreciate the enormous differences in the material demands between poetry and prose. As we reclaim our literature, poetry has been the major voice of poor, working class, and colored women. A room of one's own may be a necessity for writing prose, but so are reams of paper, a typewriter, and plenty of time. I speak here of poetry as a revelatory distillation of experience, not the sterile word play that, too often, the white fathers distorted the word poetry to mean in order to cover a desperate wish for imagination without insight. For women, then, poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams toward survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. Poetry is the way we help give name to the nameless so it can be thought. The farthest horizons of our hopes and fears are cobbled by our poems, carved from the rock experiences of our daily lives. Once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our life pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of. Our erotic knowledge empowers us, becomes a lens through which we scrutinize all aspects of our existence, forcing us to evaluate those aspects honestly in terms of their relative meaning within our lives. The erotic is a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane, firmly rooted in the power of our unexpressed or unrecognized feeling. Of course, women so empowered are dangerous. So we are taught to separate the erotic from most vital areas of our lives other than sex. He pondered that a little while and then he asked, "Do black people have to pay for their doctors, too?" Because that's what TV programs had said. I smiled a little at this and told him it's not only black people who have to pay for doctors and medical care, all people in America have to. "Ah," he said. "And suppose you don't have the money to pay?" "Well," I said, "if you don't have the money to pay, sometimes you died." And there was no mistaking my gesture, even though he had to wait for the translator to translate it. We left him looking absolutely nonplussed, standing in the middle of the square with his mouth open and his hand under his chin staring after me, as in utter amazement that human beings could die from lack of medical care. It's things like that that keep me dreaming about Russia long after I've returned.